Good evening. I would like to call the Committee of the Whole Budget Meeting of May 23rd, 2023 to order. My name is Greg Reimer, Counselor and Chair of the Budget Committee. I would like to begin by reading a safety notice. In the event of emergency, please evacuate council chambers to the nearest exit through the chamber doors and obey all instructions given. And if assistance is required, please see the clerk in the front here. Deputy Clerk, once you have evacuated the building, please gather in the front parking lot outside of Town Hall. Also, please ensure that you place your cell phones on silent or that they're turned off. And lastly, the Town of Lincoln Council meetings are posted on our YouTube channel. Closed captioning is available on all of our videos by selecting the closed captioning button on the bottom right of the video. Roll call for this evening. Members of council are in attendance with regrets from Councillor Timmers. We also have staff, lots of staff today. Good to see everybody here. Number 3, declaration of interest. Are there any declarations of interest this evening? Seeing none. Statutory public meetings is number 4 on our agenda. We have no statutory public meetings. Delegations number 5. We do not have any delegations. Consent agenda number 6. We have no consent agenda items. And we charge right into number 7. Our regular agenda. We are now considering item 7.1, which is a presentation provided by the Ad Hoc Capital Financing Debt Review Committee regarding an initial update from the Ad Hoc Committee. Our CEO and Acting Director of Finance and Administration Innovation will be providing a presentation. Mike and Charlotte, please go ahead.
Next slide. First slide. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening to members of council. We do have half an hour scheduled for this session, so I won't go through each slide, but in terms of what we hope to discuss today, want to provide you a little bit of an overview on what happened at our first committee, as well as really what we were tasked to do at that first committee, and that is to come back with a recommendation on 2 particular projects that we discussed with members of council back in April during that presentation. You asked us to go away and to look at senior levels of government and what that would mean from a delay perspective in terms of the grants, and then a few next steps. Next slide. So first meeting, I'll spend time on this one. I won't spend a lot of time on what we discussed, but all members of council who were part of this working group were in attendance, as were a majority of senior staff. We did spend, I think, as I said to members of council when I sent you this presentation, a little bit of time, the first hour and a half or so, really setting some ground rules, going over history, and looking at what other municipalities were doing. I think a collective kind of getting off our chests a lot of the issues that may have been discussed during the budget process and during the update meeting in April. We talked a little bit about what business cases would look like in 2024 and what type of information council would like. We talked a little bit about principles for decision making and how this committee would function. We talked a little bit about how we share information, just generally communicating with one another, the types of information council wants to have. And we talked about how we look at projects potentially a little bit differently. Not every project is created equal on that list. And I recall, I think it was Councillor Murray that highlighted how we look at the Prudhome's project. And we've heard from consecutive finance directors and myself, as well as our director of planning, how Prudhome's potentially should be looked at differently maybe than other projects. So we talked a little bit about that. We talked about ensuring transparency and decision-making moving forward and just building on the level of transparency we currently have. And we talked about language, the importance of language. Sometimes we use words like sides, but really it's about perspectives and having differing perspectives and how we bring those perspectives together. Next slide. So spent a little bit of time in that meeting also laying out, once again, some of this information shouldn't be new, just the complexity that goes into capital planning, that goes into long-term planning from a budget perspective, and just generally how project and project prioritization happens. This list isn't new to you, members of council, but all these things make up how we look at projects. The asset management plan, our reserve balances, development charge background studies, water and wastewater rate studies, Again, all these things that are coming to fruition this year or next year. Next slide. We spent a little bit of time reviewing work that we spent the last 4 years on, and that is simply where we're at in the process in terms of policies and accountabilities. Again, that first hour and a half, almost 2 hours of the meeting really was establishing and getting out on the table a lot of this background information. Next slide. This is a bit of a regurgitation of information that we shared in the past and that we've shared with members of council, but I thought it important when we talk about debt and long-term financial flexibility, what are the principles that are already embedded and approved in the town's process? And so I think you can see them here. Why debt is important, why we look at debt the way we do, why we look at long-term borrowing and capital financing. Next slide. So we talked about how do things potentially move up and down in terms of the priority list and what that looks like. We talked about how we have 10-year capital plans, and in a lot of times those are placeholders. We talked the importance, first and foremost, of public health and safety and how that sets really the parameter and sets, I think, in a lot of ways, the prioritization and the criteria for projects, for moving projects ahead. But we also talked about what we're seeing happen around us: interest rates, inflation rates, financial sustainability and flexibility, as well as the types of projects and the urgency of those projects. Next slide. So again, this slide should look somewhat familiar, or at least some of the points on this slide should look familiar. We talked about where Lincoln's at in its evolution, in its trajectory. We talked a little bit about the growth phase we're in. We talked about what our capital investments have looked like for the last 4 years and why. We talked about spending, and we talked about where debt is coming from in terms of DCs. And I have highlighted there nearly half of the money we're spending on projects is coming from development charges. We talked about what's affecting and increasing long-term borrowing in a number of municipalities. And again, there's nothing new here in terms of conversations on legislation, conversations on the fact that we have a new DC study coming, and just where projects are at. This morning, a number of staff met with Watson, and I will share with council moving forward. Just they did a chronology and a review of project costs in a number of municipalities. And just in a year's time, some projects have increased by anywhere between 64 and 146%, which is a huge jump. And I think council will find that document interesting. The bottom point I want to highlight is really, I think, essential, and that is, in the past, our policy suggests that our capital levy goes up by CPI. And I think oftentimes a lot of people look at tax increases and they say CPI, and they look at a whole bunch of other indices and say that's what we need to increase by. If we look at our policy over the last few years, CPI has been considerably higher than 1.5%, yet that's what we've continued to invest in the capital program. So I think what you're going to hear from staff moving forward, and of course this does need, I think as we work through the working group and have more conversations, we should be putting more money in the bank. We should be putting money in our savings accounts and looking at continuing to invest both in the capital program and in our various special infrastructure levies. So I leave you with that. Definitely more information and more conversation coming on that. Next slide. So this was the crux of our conversation really at that meeting, and these are the two recommendations we have in front of you that you send us away to look at. I'll start by saying we're not canceling these projects. We're not coming back to you next year as part of the budget process and having deliberations, but we are delaying construction commencement. So I think it's important to highlight delaying construction commencement of these two capital projects, Lincoln Avenue and Durham Road. Underneath there, you've seen us highlight the amount of debt that we'll be likely taking on in terms of long-term borrowing for those projects, as well as what the principal and interest is on those two projects and the percentage of our own source revenue that they contribute to. We did confirm with senior levels of government that there will be no impact to the grants. And really that's what we were sent away to look at. Next slide. Also discussed were these two additional project updates. I only bring both of these forward because we did speak to them, or we did speak about them at our ad hoc working group committee conversation. Ontario Street, this probably doesn't come as a surprise to a number of you who have been here for a long time and seen the region take the lead on projects. They are leading the tendering, contract, and actual invoicing. So in terms of when this project and when the monies for this project will be hitting our books, for lack of a better word, that will be 2025. So that was just an update that we provided to committee, but there is no delay in terms of the start to construction. That's still going to occur this year. For Green Lane Phase 1, I did think it was important to bring back to council. Again, we had this conversation at the ad hoc committee. In the Public Works Q1 report, Director Graham and his team did update members of council in terms of what would be occurring this year and what we would be looking at in terms of construction staging and the development timing. Again, the majority of the project budget will not be incurred until 2025, with work starting at the end of this year and early next year in terms of hydro pole relocations, and then the majority of the digging up of the road and the additional works would occur in 2025. Next slide. As I said, we spent a little time talking about these particular issues or these particular prioritization. Still need to go back to this. This is draft, but I've highlighted them there again because I thought it was important to share with members of council what happened at our first meeting. We talked about a healthy community lens, and is that the overarching theme? Then we talked about the importance of health and safety, legislated, mandated, and legal obligations. And then the other items that we've highlighted before you: growth funded projects, council priorities, grant opportunities, and partnerships. Staff will be coming back with sample business cases, so our ad hoc team can find one that is best to use. And as I said, and it was, I believe, Councillor Murray that made this suggestion. And again, this is draft in nature. We need to at times look at projects differently. You can't put them all in a bucket and say, here's an amalgam of projects and they're all the same. They're not all the same. West Lincoln Memorial Hospital was a commitment in 2008 that is coming to fruition, and Prudhome's, in terms of the infrastructure investments there and the ROI on that, as you've heard, as I said, you've heard from me, you've heard from Director Bruder, you heard from Director Wagner before, and most recently from Director Charlotte, the importance of Prudhome's and how that looks and what that means. Next slide. So at the next meeting, we're going to get much more into some of the analysis, limits, what's appropriate, the different types of long-term borrowing and how those are segmented, reserve targets and how we work towards targets, and how we come back to council and report back. So next slide. That should be it. Open to questions, comments, or points of clarity. And Director Graham, Charlotte, and I are here to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Charlotte, for that report. Council, do we have questions or comments to the report or to the motion? Councillor Njima, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the committee for all their work on this, first and foremost, and work that's going to be happening in the future. I understand we're going to be voting on these together, or we're going to be voting them tonight, both the proposed projects that are proposed to be delayed. During the budget process, I put a motion forward to delay Durham Road, and so I'm in favor of that. But I'm not in favor of delaying the construction of Lincoln Avenue, and primarily because from my understanding, the high school is supposed to be completed this year, and I can see that there potentially could be a lot of kids walking up Lincoln Avenue to get to the high school. And so the sooner that the Lincoln Avenue gets started, the better, in my opinion. Mr. Chair, will we be voting on these separately tonight?
We are voting as the motion reads. That's the motion that came from the ad hoc committee, so they are together.
Okay, can I put a motion
Yes.
forward, please, to separate them out? Two items?
That's an amendment then?
amendment.
Deputy
to the
Clerk?
motion.
Sorry, clerk.
Yep.
Julie,
it's an
yes, it's an amendment. So you'd like to make that an amendment?
Yes, please.
Questions from council on that amendment alone? So we have some in the queue, but do you have comments on that amendment now or not? Councilor Renee, Councilor Miklick? Councilor Patriva, you have one?
Just for clarification.
Councilor Renee, could you back out of the queue?
Sorry.
Yep, just that's, you're stuck in the middle there. There we are. Go ahead, Councilor Patrick.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Reimer. I think Councilor Renchema has it backwards. So if we're talking about construction of the high school and kids walking to school, it would be Durham that they would be walking on. I can't see them walking up and down Lincoln Avenue and then across Green Lane to the high school. Right? So just,
Thank you.
okay, well then I'll come out and you say what you're thinking, because I thought maybe you had them mixed.
Councilor Najima. Thank you, Councilor Patriva.
Okay, so I can see that there are kids that live on Lincoln Avenue in the Oakwood area. There's a development right up by King at the corner of King and Lincoln Avenue on the north side. And I believe there will be kids from there walking to the high school. That's what I was referring to. Are you talking about busing from Durham Road? Okay, I see what you're saying, Counselor. Yeah, no, I'm referring more to people on foot walking from their area to the high school. Thank you.
Clerk, do we have that amendment? Can we read it?
So what we can do is, Councillor Regina would like to divide the two projects. So
Yes.
the one that you want divided out, Councillor, is Lincoln Avenue, correct? We can vote on just that one item. And that is to remove it. Is that right? To not delay it. Right.
She wants to vote on them separately, Julie.
Yeah, we can do that.
So we don't need amendment for that?
Well, we need a vote to amend it for sure.
Okay.
So all in favor of raise your hands.
Everybody in favor of dividing Durham and Lincoln and voting on them separately?
Yes.
All in favor?
And that carries. Okay.
Okay, everybody come back in the queue with comments. I believe Councilor Renee had some. Councilor Renee, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Reimer. So through you, I just have a couple questions to our Director of Public Works. So, I mean, Councilor Ringem is correct. We did have considerable discussion about possibly deferring or delaying both of these projects, both Durham and Lincoln. When it came to Lincoln, I was fully prepared to defer it, but there was discussions that night about funding and what that was going to do. So I still have a concern. So through you, Chair, to Director Graham. We had heard, quite frankly, during the budget that there was a good chance we might not get shovels in the ground until late 2023. So I'm wondering if in the big scheme of things, what we're actually doing here. So I guess it's a two-pronged question, Chair. I'd like to ask the first question to Chair or to Director Graham. Do we have the ability to get the tender out and put in the RFP that we were asking the contractor to hold the price into the fall or the spring of 2024? Because, what I do have concerned about, and Mr. Kukopoulos talked about projects going up 164%. I'm expecting that if the federal and provincial government throw some cash out there to inject some construction, that, things are going to be really, really busy. And I don't see construction costs coming down. So I just hope we're not shooting ourselves in the foot here. I appreciate, as Councillor Ringem alluded to, the work that the ad hoc committee has done and will continue to do. And I really think we need to focus on the debt limits. And I see that on the slide. So that's great. But I'm just wondering if Director Graham could talk to our ability to be able to hold the price into early 2024 with the contractors so that we don't have the risk of paying another escalation when we go to tender if we defer it.
Director Graham.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. A great question. And just a couple points I'd like to make. So since the budget and in follow-up from the ad hoc committee discussions, we have had conversations with the federal government on the grant. So the grant will not be impacted if we don't issue a tender this year. So we have that flexibility and not affecting our grant, which is something we don't want to impact. So we've made sure that's okay. In terms of the tender and the pricing, what we're looking at doing is building strategies into our tender to provide for flexible schedules. In speaking to contractors, that's very important. In attracting good bids is to provide a flexible schedule for bidding. So we're going to be building that strategy into the tender document as we go into next year. We are hoping to get the tender out late this year with those types of strategies in it to do our best to foster good pricing with the contracting market. So that is our plan moving forward. We have heard from different contractor groups that you don't want to, put really tight timelines in tenders, and it allows contractors not to have much flexibility with their own schedule. So we're building those strategies into, like I say, foster good pricing and hold bid pricing.
Counselor?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that question. Second question,
Sure can.
Chair. So I'm just wondering, again, I appreciate what the ad hoc committee is doing. I see up there about Green Lane and Ontario Street. I'm just wondering, I guess I'll pose this first question before I go down that road. I'm wondering, during the budget, we heard multiple times from Director Wagner that the sky was not falling and that we were going to be okay for 2023. So when I look at the number, and again, this is not a reflection of what the ad hoc committee is doing or what CL2 is doing. We directed as council for the ad hoc committee to go back and look and make sure that the funding wasn't being thrown out the window. So I appreciate all that. But when I look at that number, I'm trying to understand what we're actually doing here for 2023. We were told when we were approving $48 million, we don't have a concern about 2023. It's over here on the graph, 2024, 25, 26, where we start to have a problem. So I'm just wondering if through you, Chair, to Charlotte, is there something else in play here? Is there concerns about DC charges? We haven't really reviewed the debt threshold at this point. We've talked about 10, we've talked about 18. But I'm just really trying to understand what deferring this project is actually doing in the big picture.
Charlotte, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to the counselor. I did mention at the last council meeting that we discussed this, as well as the ad hoc committee. This is more of a cash flow management and a debt timing management strategy. I understand what you're saying, and to your point, it isn't a huge impact because it's just delaying that debt from being taken out. But what we typically do is we draw on construction loans throughout the construction of that project. So this is just postponing that a little bit so that when you look at the financial statements and the FIR, it'll just delay the timing till you see that debt taken out. But it's not due to a change in circumstance. It's just in response to the questions that you've asked us, looking at the debt limit and just trying to spread out the cash flows and the debt timing.
Council,
Okay, great. Thank you very much. My final question, Chair.
go for it.
I'm wondering if I could direct this to one of the members of the ad hoc committee. I didn't see it on the slide. So I'm wondering if it's appropriate to just before I go to a vote, I would like to know if there is any other consideration by the ad hoc committee that there are any other projects beyond the 2 and 2, the Green Lane, Ontario Street, and the 2 we're talking about voting on, that ad hoc committee is looking at moving forward.
I'll ask the vice chair of the budget committee. Councillor Russell, you comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Councillor Patriva, could you just back up for a minute? Go ahead, Councillor Russell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, through you to Councillor Bernay. We haven't gone, I think that'd probably be the next discussion point. We haven't gone into the next edition of the capital plan or the multi-year capital plan. We were just looking at trying to smooth out the next 24 months. But that is definitely going to have to be one of those things that we're going to come back with a recommendation on. Again, we're not making any decisions at the ad hoc. We're just looking to figure out what the best path forward might be, and then coming back to council for that final thought process and vote.
Good, Counselor?
Yeah, that's great.
Go ahead, Tony. Counselor?
Yeah, I appreciate that response. I know you probably weren't prepared for it and I wasn't putting anybody in a position. I'm just trying to understand the big picture. You know, when I think back of the budget process and what we went through, where we were starting at 51 million and we talked about every individual project, Lakeshore Road, Prudhome's, we went through everything. And really at the end of the day, we really didn't cut too much other than, you know, a couple $1 million from some equipment and you know, some trees and some rain barrels. So we really didn't do a whole lot of cutting. And I'm just trying to understand what this does tonight in the big scheme of things. And I'm just hopeful that we are going to make a difference as we move forward. And I guess I'm putting some faith in the ad hoc committee to continue to grind and continue to ask the tough questions and bring it back to council. And I appreciate the opportunity to ask those questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. We accept the challenge as the ad hoc committee. No problem. Council, sorry. Councilor Mikulik, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Reimer, through you to Mike and Charlotte. Thank you for the presentation, the information, the ad hoc committee for your time and effort. We talk about debt, we talk about taking on debt. Has the committee looked at debt that's coming off the books? Is there any significant debt that's coming off the books? Or are we just talking about debt that we're taking on? Because that may have an impact on the debt we're taking on also.
Charlotte?
Through you, Chair, to the counselor, I am still looking at that and trying to prepare some schedules. So I will be bringing that to the committee. I know when I looked at the 2021 FIR, Lincoln's existing debt at that point of time was still, there wasn't really a lot of debt to be falling off. So what we're taking on is more new. And so it will be a bit of time before that falls off, but we will be looking at that and I will bring a debt schedule to the committee.
Okay, thank you. And then another question
Go ahead, Counselor.
to the CAO, slide 4, there's a point there with prepayment negotiations, front end agreement negotiations. What does that look like? What are these negotiations? How do we negotiate? And is there parameters or is there budgets or is there numbers that we as council approve to be negotiated? Or I'm just making sure we don't give away, money on the table that could be.
Through you, Chair. So
CEO.
Counselor, it's exactly where I think the conversation we had this morning with our consultants at Watson was very much along those lines. What is that delta potentially as we get into, there's three types of agreements we can enter. I'll probably focus on the two. One is a front end agreement where the developer in any particular case pays for the infrastructure and then receives development charge credits. That's typically what is the most advantageous for the municipality, the least advantageous for the developer. And that is why here in Niagara, I think to date over the last 2 or 3 decades, we've only seen 2 of those agreements. They're much more popular in other jurisdictions. Halton, Peel, even in Hamilton, Kitchener-Waterloo are seeing a lot more of those types of agreements. The prepayment of development charges, which allows us to have more money in the bank, versus taking out or looking at long-term borrowing, is something that is more advantageous to the developer, but does give council and the organization some comfort level in having money in the bank. We have been directed by council to explore where possible both of those. The conversations we're having this morning is, do we know what our future development charge increases will look like? And is it advantageous for us to have those monies in the bank versus long-term borrowing? Or is that delta, is that difference too great moving forward that we would want to wait till a new development charge bylaw is passed and those new rates are in? And so we are going to look at each of these, I think, on a case-by-case basis. There's only a few developers that have the financial wherewithal to be able to look at any one of those particular options. And so we will be working on a policy or something that we as staff, directors in finance, planning, and public works, as well as myself, so that we can make a decision and a recommendation to council. Are these better? Some of it does come down to philosophy and having money in the bank versus the potential of getting more money later on. But again, we have to look at each case when it comes in differently. So we will be looking at that. At the end of the day, I don't think anyone wants to see us leave money on the table, definitely not staff. And so we'll be in front of council, I think, with recommendations on those and a prospective policy later in the year.
Okay, and I ask that because you mentioned that the developers or those out there, they may not, we're not sure if we have the financial wherewithal. So we want to make sure that it's fair and equitable for everyone involved. And then another slide 8, interest rates appear to be slowing down or stabilizing. I'm just curious, like, I'm just not sure how accurate predictions have been. And I'm nervous when I see a point like that, a bullet point like that, that we should feel good or better that, you know, and I'm just, for myself, I err on caution when it comes to taking out debt and to anticipating interest rates. So it's just a comment that I'm making when the committee is looking at these sorts of things, or, you know, the news is changing every day. So those just my comments with regards to interest rates and where we think they might be heading. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Pat Riva. Thank
Thank you, Chair Reimer. So I'm going to go along the same route as Councillor Brunet and Councillor Mikulik. I mean, we had the long drawn out discussion about these at budget time, and we talked about their merits. Durham Road is the worst road in the town. It is the first exit off the QEW. My wife will not let me drive her car down Durham Road anymore to get to the highway. We've got a water main project going on that a couple local businesses are taking on. We've got the high school opening. It would make sense to do this. Like, we're playing a game here of, will interest rates go down? Like, I'm looking at this holistically. So the principal and interest is $705,000 on both projects. So what is that on Durham? And can we expect to hold this price of 3.43 million? Or are we running the risk that it goes up, interest rates go down, but we're still paying more? That's the fear that I have, right? So we know what this is now. What are we hoping to gain? We're losing a lot of public confidence because we said to them, this is going to happen. Councillor Brunet and I went up and down Lincoln Avenue saying, your road is finally going to get done. What does that make me look like? And we had a speech and you know, again, we had recommendation from staff, 18% let's get through. Councillor Russell pulled out of the air 14% to make it passable. Yet he vilified me the year before when we tried to increase the construction, the infrastructure levy by 0.5%, when all the details were there. Right? You just said that we should be increasing that. So I want to see numbers. I want to see this. I don't want to see two things taken out of a snapshot. I want to see everything laid out because this is dominoes. So we're moving Green Lane over to 2025. What other projects are going to move down the road? I mean, I was in favor of lifting the threshold for a couple of years to get through this. And can we be guaranteed that these prices are going to stay? You just said 164% increase. So does 3.4 go to 5 or 6? Councillor Brunet, you're in the construction. Councillor Reimer, you're there. You're kind of experts on this. Like, what's your feeling? Because my feeling right now is my stomach is churning. So, and it's might be from the sickness I had this weekend, but I think it's looking at these slides. So just your thoughts on that.
Mr. CEO, I can tell you have comments.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So, you know, in terms of what Durham Road specifically means, out of that 750, it's 158,504. It is the smaller of the projects, and I completely understand that, Councillor. I think your comment around will these projects increase? Do we know what that looks like? I would tell you, if we did the projects and tendered them right now, I don't know what prices are coming in at. I think that's the challenge. We're not playing games. We're not playing dominoes. I don't think the ad hoc committee is. Council challenged us when you made those decisions in April to go away and look at how we smoothen that out. Not eliminate it, not get rid of it. You're not seeing us here take away these projects and say they're back for deliberation next year. What you're seeing us say is we want to delay the tendering of them so that instead of starting this year, if and where possible, they start next year. Now that looks different for Lincoln as it does for Durham, because we do have to do some public consultation on Lincoln anyways. But I think what we're saying here is, and I think it's these two projects I would encourage you to look at. Ontario Street isn't changing.
Mhm.
Our update to you is simply because it's the region, it's a region-led project. When we take on debt for that project, looks a lot different than maybe we hadn't been as clear with you at the beginning. Green Lane, I think in a lot of ways, we talked about staging. Council highlighted the importance of how people move around our community. We have a development that's been slightly delayed as well. So I think when you take all of that into consideration, we often get criticized for digging twice, doing things twice, coming back, make work type comments that I often hear. This is probably the best approach on Green Lane. Again, not here before you on a decision on those two. It's really Lincoln and Durham. And I understand going out to residents, you lose trust potentially because residents have waited for those two particular projects. I heard some of the criticism on social media when we shared this information, and there was an article in the paper.
Mhm.
I think what we're looking to do is actually smoothen it out. These take space, time and energy as part of our work plan in 2024. And so you will see, obviously you will see things get spread out a little bit more. But I would say even before this decision, that was always our intention with members of council, was to look at how we spread out the number of projects and the ability to do all those projects.
Through you, Chair, I mean, I would personally feel better tendering them later this year to the ability to get that price. And then, you know what, you do the hydro relocations on Lincoln Avenue. Like, you don't need to go full blown construction. So at least there's some integrity still there in things moving forward. Durham Road, I mean, it's no different than Jordan, when you've got business people making that private investment. Sends the wrong message when we don't support them like we said we were going to. It's just my personal thoughts, and the construction was going to be tied in to the finishing of the road. So now, is that going to drive the cost of their project up? Right? Because they had planned on this was going hand in glove. So maybe that's a question to Mr. Graham.
Mr. Graham, do you care to comment on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, that's not my understanding. I think they can be, separated for restoration, so there wouldn't be an extra cost to those businesses for their water main work.
Councillor?
It's okay.
Mayor Easton and then Councillor Russell. Go ahead, Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to check that last statement about Durham. If I couldn't really hear Mr. Graham, could you just repeat that, your response, please?
The response to Councillor Patriva, Mayor Easton?
Councillor Patriva.
Yeah, absolutely. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the mayor. The two projects are separate. The businesses who are extending the water main and then the town's road project that we're talking about tonight. So if we delay the construction of our road project, it won't cause the businesses an extra cost with their project.
Okay. Are we absolutely clear through you, Mr. Chairman, as to the timing between the two businesses in terms of when they're going to be ready to go ahead with extending the water line? Are they all ready to go?
Director Graham?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the mayor. So it's our understanding that the businesses are planning to do the work start in June. And we anticipate that work would probably be 2.5 to 3 months before their work is done. Pushing is into, end of August. So that's what that project is looking like in terms of work duration. And then if we were to tender our road and start our road work, we'd have to try and get that work done before the winter weather for paving.
Okay,
Mary's,
and is that desirable? Is it desirable to have that the paving done then, or can we do the extension and then wait?
Director Graham?
The businesses can do the extension of the water main and can wait. We can do the road next year. You know, we'll have to continue to maintain the road with any pothole repairs and whatnot, but that is a possibility. Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. And Lincoln Avenue, separating out the activity in regard to moving the poles. When would we tender that? And when could that work be done if we decide to separate that out to put some activity on that street?
Three, Mr. Chair, to the mayor, maybe just to clarify, the reference around the hydro pole relocation was related to the Green Lane Phase 1 project that we were speaking to earlier. That's the project that we're decided to delay construction in order to stage around the large regional King Street rehabilitation work planned later this year by the region. So that the hydro pole element that we're speaking to is related to the Green Lane project, not the Lincoln Avenue project.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was I had written down the wrong word. All right, so we have Mr. Chairman, we have Durham Road that is reliant on two businesses coming together to do an extension. And that seems to be in hand. We have Green Lane where we could tender the work and we could have the poles moved. But I don't hear anything. What I hear about Lincoln Avenue is that there is a public expectation. I don't think that we should ignore a public expectation that has been going on for as long as that has. This reminds me of Rittenhouse Road. So that's another matter. However, one of the things, Mr. Chairman, that I don't think that we can underestimate, and it certainly wasn't taken lightly in the ad hoc committee, was that we wanted to smooth things out. Let's not underestimate what that means. It means that we want to move things around. Delays are not denials. So we're moving a few things around. Timing is often our greatest asset. So we can move things around, but we can still, the intentions are unchanged. We're going to get this work done. And that's where I think that the conversation was going. You know, I thought about what else was happening that night. It's an ad hoc committee. You're starting out. Two of us voted for it, two voted against it. Mike's absolutely right. We had different perspectives. We had to get through the conversation on the different perspectives. That was the right thing to do. Would I say that we were building goodwill by putting these delays in place? I don't think so. We'd already talked about the delays during the discussion. In a smaller group, we became more focused on what the issues were. And so I still maintain that the recommendation that we're bringing forward is not going to be ideal in every case, and certainly not in terms of public expectation, but it's also not a denial. It is a delay. There could be any number of things coming along that would cause us to move into a delay. So I'm going to continue to support the recommendation as we brought it forward. I certainly hope that our council colleagues aren't looking for us to be making predictions that none of us could make in terms of interest rates and tender prices and cooperation by the companies involved. I think this is the right decision, And I think it's going to make us a little bit more comfortable as we go into the next discussion, because that's when we're probably really going to be hammering the table on occasion. Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mary Easton. I have Councillor Russell and then a quick one from Councillor Brunei. Councillor Russell, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to pick up where Mayor Easton left off. And also to go back to Councillor Brunei's question earlier. One of the concepts that we did discuss, and I think you appreciate the analogy, was looking at our long-term spending kind of with like a soft cap. Based on the inflow and outflow of revenue, be that through the tax levy, be that through government funding, be that through DC charges. And then coming up with whatever that math model looks like to figure out an approximation of what our yearly spending will be on capital per year. And again, there will be flexibility based on all those items that our CAO laid out, health and safety, items that are legislatively required, things like that. And then we'll be able to see those ebbs and flows of that soft cap. And again, soft cap may not be the best term, but again, as it relates to this, I think it's a good analogy. In talking to our former director, finance director Wagner, again, just based on what his estimation was of where our soft cap may lie, he was thinking it's probably going to be somewhere in the $25 to $30 million range in terms of capital spend. So when you factor that in, and again, I'm just bringing that forward based on a talking point. And you look at what our spend was this past year, again, obviously we are way over that. And to Councillor Pachiriva's point, yes, we will absolutely have to bump things out. And that 10-year capital plan that we've got now is probably a 20-year capital plan, which means really we're probably going to be doing half the number of projects each year going forward that we are now. And we're going to have to, like a Tetris game, try to figure out, here's our budget, and try to figure out what those projects are going to be to fit into that with some flexibility, because we want to make sure we're not stopping any of our progress and we're doing everything in the best interest of the community, but we want to make sure that we are being fiscally responsible going forward. And I think that is where we're trying to get to as a committee, and we're trying to bring those recommendations forward. I think staff bringing this recommendation forward to the committee to delay these made sense, and that's why the four of us agreed that it was a great path forward, because it's not denying them, as Mayor Easton mentioned, it's just delaying them in the short term, and we're doing it under the idea that we're being fiscally responsible. We do have new long-term debt that came on that we weren't expecting with the Lakeshore project. We did have some delay in some of the funding from the DCs with some of the delays in the projects that are being seen out there in the community. And we have to be able to make sure that we are being responsible. So just my thoughts.
And Councillor Russell, Councillor Brunei, and then we'll go.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to ask one other question. So, the mayor made a comment that timing is our greatest asset. And I would agree with that. Sometimes timing is an asset, but I look at the new high school that's being built. It's going to open up in, I think, September. So 3 months down the road, the new high school, I believe all costs in, remediation, land costs, we're probably looking at a $60 million high school. We've known this high school was being built. This isn't something that is an aberration that just came out of nowhere. COVID delayed it. The remediation, the soil remediation delayed it. I guess I'm really struggling. We've got Durham Road, the main arterial road that comes from the service road coming off Bartlett, to come up to that intersection at the roundabout to go to a brand new high school where we're making connection, we're making new sidewalks to make sure our children are coming to the school safely. Where the heck, through you, Chair, to our finance department, where the heck have our DC charges? Because surely there has to be something built in for infrastructure around a $60 million high school. Where have all the DC charges that DSBN is going to be paying on that property? Where have they gone?
Do you have enough information to speak to that, Charlotte, or maybe
So I'm
Director Bruder?
So through you, Mr. Chair, to the counselor, I'm just confirming, do school boards which are considered institution pay development charges?
Director Bruder, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Institutional uses such as schools typically don't. So that's a good clarification.
Councillor Brunei.
So let me just clarify, typically don't. So we're not getting any DC charges on that property from DSBN.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Thank you very much.
Counselor Njima, a really quick one. Sorry, my bad.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I guess this isn't a question, it's just a comment, a clarification of what my comment earlier on, and that's that I'm out of the two projects. I would really like to see Lincoln Avenue go forward for health and safety reasons. And that's why I'm going to be voting, when it's separate, they'll be voting in favor of having Lincoln Avenue move forward as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Julie, would you please read out how we divided those, just so we're clear? Them are the same idea, but we're voting on them separately. Could you please?
We're
read them?
voting on them separately. That's correct, Chair. So through you, the first one moved by Councillor Russell will be as follows. Receive and file as information the presentation provided by the Ad hoc Capital Financing Debt Review Committee, and that council approved the delay of construction commencement on the following 2023 capital project until spring 2024 Durham Road at 3.43 million. That's the first motion that we will be voting on. And then the second one separated, moved by Councillor Rajima, that council approved the delay of construction commencement on the following 2023 capital project until spring 2024 Lincoln Avenue, 10.5 million, 1.7 million in grants from senior levels of government.
Thank you, Clerk. So the first one is for Durham Road. Could you
That's
please
correct.
call the vote?
Sure. And that is now open for voting. And this is on Durham Road. And I will close that vote. And that carries 6-2.
Thank you. Thank you. Please call the vote for the second project.
Yes. And that is open. And this is for Lincoln Avenue. And I will close that vote. And that carries 5-3.
Thank you, Clerk Kirklos. Moving on to number 8, confidential items. We have no further confidential items. Number 9, committee remarks. Does anybody in the committee have remarks this evening regarding budget? We're good. There being no further business, I call this meeting adjourned at 6:20.